Carney is selling Canada and its financial future to the highest foreign bidder. Mark Carney ended his week in Abu Dhabi by unveiling a $1 billion critical minerals deal paired with a UAE plan to invest up to $70 billion in Canadian energy, mining, AI, and infrastructure. On paper, it looks like investment in jobs. In reality, these are short-term jobs that trade long-term control of Canada's strategic assets to a foreign state. UAE money flowing into mines, ports, LNG, and data centers is equity ownership, not partnership, giving the UAE leverage over critical minerals, national interest infrastructure, and even data security. Canada is turning to foreign capital because domestic investors won't touch our regulatory gridlock and political volatility. And Carney is sweetening the pot by signing a new FIPA, F-I-P-A, that gives Emirati investors the right to sue Canada if our policies ever shift. This fits a broader pattern. Germany, China, India, and others gaining deeper ownership of Canada's resources while the long-term wealth flows out. So are these investments or slow motion transfers of national control?
They're definitely slow motion transfers of national control. This doesn't make any sense. This really threw me off when I started digging into what was happening here. So Carney's basically pitching this like, oh, we'll generate all these foreign investments, and he's got the major projects office as well, the MPO, which is what he's using as his sort of conduit to launch all these national infrastructure projects. But he himself calls it a magnet for foreign investment. So it's important to understand here that he's not just bringing in foreign investment like the U.S. is. So the U.S. is like, well, bring your money here or tariffs exist. So that's a financial leverage move. So you get Apple, you get Samsung, you get, you name the company, they're now doing more production in the States. In fact, they're leaving Canada like Stellantis to go down to the US and build big production facilities there. So they own the means of production already. They're buying resources from America and from other places around the world, bringing them in there. They're hiring employees there, and they're increasing GDP and having more output and more supply in the economy. So overall, that's a good way to operate your country. What we're doing here is we're bringing in money and we're selling our natural resources. We're selling our assets. We're selling all of the things you listed. We're selling oil. We're selling gas. We're selling critical minerals. We're selling the supply chains. We're selling expansion. We're tying our energy production to other governments' industrial needs. We're selling AI. We're selling IT. We're selling data centers. We're selling everything that you would consider national interest assets. This is not a positive thing because what they're doing is, just like in America, yeah, okay, it's creating some jobs. That's the only positive. Otherwise, all of the stuff Canada should have long-term, we're offshoring. We're not only offshoring the asset value, we're offshoring control. If you own our natural resources, or at least a portion thereof, and can control supply chains and production volumes, that dramatically changes our economic output and our potential here. So this is insane. He's literally just selling the country to foreign buyers. And people are like, oh, this kind of stuff happens all the time. I'm like, not in developing countries that need to recover. No, it doesn't actually. This is what happens in countries that are getting pillaged by places like Bolivia, like Venezuela. You see these kinds of things happen, right? So this is a really, really terrible move. We're going very much in the wrong direction with this. And the example that I like to use is, this is like the 407 on steroids. So for people that don't know, the 407 is a toll highway in Ontario. It was built primarily with government money, then sold for pennies on the dollar, and now foreign companies make tons of money off of the tolls they collect all the time. It's the same bullshit. It makes no sense. All it is Carney having basically some ribbon-cutting ceremonies, having a few short-term jobs, and him taking some PR wins. This totally fucks Canada.
And I think that entire class ends up winning on the back end, because I've thought about this more and more when it comes to these historical narratives that we were indoctrinated with over the last 10 years or so about colonialization and imperialism and all of this kind of stuff, right? About America's past. And hey, a lot of it is true. Like, you look at what the CIA was doing back in the 1900s, where they were toppling governments that wouldn't let their corporations come in and absolutely, have full control of their resources. It happened in Guatemala. It happened in Iran and actually that's a great example of it, where Iran's leadership before the CIA-backed coup was giving, I think they were getting about 10% of the oil profits, and the rest was being given to the British and Americans, right. Primarily the British. Yep. But so they came in, and that's where the whole revolution happened, and all of that was with the CIA, they overthrew the one leader that wanted to essentially push these companies out, and same thing with Guatemala. And so we get these historical narratives in order to make us seem like we need to take it now, where it's like, oh, you guys, it's an eye for an eye kind of thing. Well,
Sure.
You can't complain about it happening to you right now because you were guilty of it 50 years ago or 100 years ago or whatever. And hey, maybe that's true, but this is where I'm getting to when it comes to the geopolitical stuff, is like this idea that you can just back off and then go and like essentially become undefensive about any of this kind of stuff and stop playing the game doesn't mean other people are going to stop playing that game. And this is where you're now seeing it, whether it's UAE, whether it's China, and especially with those nations, like you look at their corporations and their companies, and they're completely owned by the ruling class. Like the CCP has their hand in every single one of the corporations. And so it's indistinguishable. It's not just like a corporation wanting to spread its wings and go into another area. It's like, no. You have to look at that as a state-backed entity that's also trying to seize geopolitical control. And now, I mean, you see it with Canadians, where it's just like people are completely indifferent to this now, where it's just like, oh yeah, like whatever, this is the new world. And it's like, doesn't have to be.
I agree, but I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier too, about flooding Canada with immigration as well. I think we've brought in, like, in the last 10 years, I feel like we've increased our population by 30% because we've had a declining birth rate. It's safe to say it's 90% immigrants. So you kind of look at that, maybe more. You look at that and you kind of go, well, if we're going to be offshoring our critical assets to all these foreign countries, some that may even be considered adversaries at one time or another,
or today still.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. I mean, so you look at that and you kind of go, well, yeah, but if Canada is so diverse because we've allowed so many people to immigrate to the country, you kind of look at it and go, like, who's going to push back? And you also created this narrative in Canada where it's like, well, if you complain about immigration, you're a xenophobe or you're racist. So then it's almost a part of the same conversation all of a sudden. You know, it's kind of like, well, why would you have a problem with that? What's wrong with the UAE? What's wrong with Chinese? What's wrong with Germany having their hands in our assets? Are you xenophobic? Do you have an issue with this? And so people are like, oh, you know what? I think I'm going to back out of that. And you have no real public discourse because people feel uncomfortable or afraid to even engage, which is wild.
I think this is where it comes down to a great a distinction that was made by Orwell, where he said the difference between patriotism and nationalism. Like, nationalism is an ideology where you think your nation and people are superior, and that grants you the ability to enforce your will upon other nations and ethnicities and whatever. And then there's patriotism, which is defensive. It's a shield. So nationalism is the sword, patriotism is the shield. And I think it's it's necessary to have a shield, to want to defend what you have, what was built. That doesn't mean I think you should, go around and completely pillage everybody, but to also pretend like there aren't these nations like China, which openly states it has world domination goals by 2050, to then just be like, oh, you're a well-intentioned partner that just wants to see everybody do better and have open trade. And this is kind of like, I mean, you know, back in the 2010 to 2020 era, and you know, these thinkers were very, very they made a large impression on me as well. The Sowells of the world, the Milton Friedmans, that were complete proponents of open markets around the globe, thinking like that was great. And it is in theory, but then as soon as you realize that some people don't want to play that game, some people look at a free market in your nation as an ability to undermine you, then you need to take that into account. And actually, I really like the way that Doomberg said it in our recent interview with him, where he said the free market is very terrible at pricing national security. And I mean, that's the pattern that we're finding ourselves in now. And also too, the difference between, say, you know, immigration back in the late 1900s compared to now is, a lot of the time the mentality was, okay, let's move to a country and then build a new life there and establish ourselves there. Where a lot of the immigration mindset now is, let's move to another country for the economic opportunity only. We don't want to become part of that culture. We don't want to contribute to that society. And rather, we want to extract wealth from that society and send it back home.
Yes.
And I remember even talking, and that's a completely different mindset. And I remember talking to a client of mine in the videography world. It's kind of interesting because he was a Swedish immigrant to Canada. Wonderful man. I'm a big fan of him. He was a Swedish immigrant to Canada, and he was discussing how there was a argument that broke out between two or three Italian employees that he has, and then 2 or 3 Indian employees that he has. And essentially that's what they were arguing about, was the Indian immigrants were talking about how, this is just, we're just here for the short to medium term in order to, because we see it as an economic opportunity. And then, what we're really concerned about is our nation back home, and they're sending all that money there. And then the Italian immigrants were really offended by that, because they were like, wait, my parents and grandparents came here and they like put their blood, sweat, and tears into this country.
Yes.
And that's now what I get to experience. And you want to just extract from that. And so it was really interesting that, multiculturalism, that's diversity in reality.
Well, that's what you get. You get people being patriotic about their own countries,
right,
just coming here and then leveraging it because there's more opportunity. But there's also an interesting thing too. Considering Mark Carney's actual relationship with these countries through Brookfield.
Mm-hmm.
So the UAE has invested several $1 billion into Brookfield.
Mm-hmm.
So they've invested billions into something called a catalytic transition fund. They've invested billions into joint ventures to develop real estate in the Middle East. They've committed billions to these global transition funds. In fact, it says the UAE is clearly not just a passive investor, it's a strategic partner in Brookfield's transition climate finance strategy and real estate strategy in the Middle East. So we're talking billions of dollars, probably between 5 and 10 billion, that these companies are in that have intertwined with one another. Of course, Carney was the chair of Brookfield. Apparently his assets are in a blind trust. However, he's making massive deals with people in the UAE and their country to now leverage Canada's resources. So I want Canadians to understand what this is. You getting bent over.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what this is. He's using, it's like any time too, you have like this major projects office. This is called central planning. This is the worst thing that you can possibly have, is when you have a few of these oligarchs or elites that say, we know what's best for millions and millions of people. You don't have free will to decide. We will decide what's going on with these major projects through central planning. And we're going to leverage off these assets to these major countries that some may consider adversaries, but I'm actually deep in business with them in another area. So that's how this is going to play out. Mm-hmm. This is fucked.
And actually, just to wrap that up, that's exactly what I was trying to, I think I overlooked it a little bit when I was bringing up the whole Iran history with the British and American companies in there with the oil. But yeah, you look at, say...
I was actually adding on to that. Right. That's what gave me that thought.
Because I was looking at that going, okay, if the Iranian leaders, most people would look at that and go, oh, they're only getting 10% of the revenue from this, or the profits. I can't remember which one it was. But either way, they're getting 10% of the pot. Well, then if they're getting 10% of a lot, then that's beneficial to them. They're very happy to do that, even if that means the Iranian people themselves getting 0%.
Yes.
Comparative to, let's say it was, they were getting 60 to 70% of the revenue was staying in Iran, but the people in the companies, in the ground level people, were getting the majority of that. That's a completely different thing. Like, what would you rather? Like 10% of a really large pot, or 30% of a very dwindling one, right? These are just arbitrary numbers. But I think that's exactly what's at play here, where people like Mark Carney and Brookfield look at Canada and they just go, yeah, we're happy to sell out all of it for 10%. Cool. We'll take that.
It's just exactly. It's just good to understand where your government's motives are, and to once again realize that they're not being done in your best interest.
Mm-hmm.